What's up, guys? With Shrimp Public coming at you. Tonight, we're going to be doing a reactive response style, mostly addition and critiquing of to the video, mostly. Kind of like what I did with the fucking diesel video with Scotty Kilmer, to an extent. Anyways, let's go into it.
You've been told fossil fuels, coal, oil, gas, they're evil.
And these type of ethic judgments cannot be applied to inanimate objects in and of themselves. They can only be applied to the use of them or by agents or actors. What you can say is the continuing of putting lead by various actors in gasoline might come off as scammy if you take into the account at the earliest in 1949 with platforming was started getting commercialized. Because with with platforming or catalytic reforming as it's also called, you could take a group of hydrocarbons known as cycloalkanes or naphthenes. Got that? Naphthenes. To make a liquid as 3/4 liquid aromatics with a research octane number of 105, and to not get into all that, to put a big tail deer for you, that's a pretty kick-ass thing. It makes it a kick-ass gasoline blend stock. Or at the latest, it seems a little more scammy. It might seem a little more scammy because they did it because my octanes need a boost, which, in the mid-1960s when the Kendu reactor technology came along and the world had finally gotten the first genuinely green nuclear technology, it could only get better with scaling up and adopting tech from 3rd and 4th generation reactors and eventually 5th generation reactor tech when it eventually comes along. Well, that can be actually put to the Kendu reactors to power such platforming fuel plants. What do I know? I'm just someone who got some basic bitch understanding of this shit and read fucking pirated literature on the petrochemistry. So what the fuck do I know, right? So yeah, instead of clowns have big clown horns to compensate for their micro penises. Well, I got a massive cock. That's why I got a micro honker. Now, so that's why I hypothesize that it seems a little bit bullshitty that we did that for that. And look what lead's being everywhere has done to the empathy and capabilities and cognitive capabilities and emotional intelligence capabilities of many boomers, Gen X types, and chunks of the millennials. I was born amongst the last thereof. Then you have the central banks that use petroleum as a reserve function of all the currencies, hence why the petrodollar act is still in action in the world, and there's a big petrocurrency trade network, still, even digital or paper. Now other big corporate governments are trying to do the same thing with their currencies so they can become the next challengers. Problem is the elites in China and Russia in particular, I'm going to point out, are not they're not the dirty R words that the UN will call you a conspiracy nut for calling the truth out. Co-own the majority of the world's central banks with the politicians of said countries. Yeah. That's a lot to say. I know. Sorry. It's a lot of unpacking.
At this demonstration, one man had the nerve to hold a sign saying, "I love fossil fuels."
You got some balls, buddy. You got some balls, my guy.
Protesters ripped it out of his hand.
That protester right there and all the others are not functioning people. They don't respect private property rights. At best, they're wage labor goyim that can be used to provide you labor to expand your business. And beyond that, nothing. Just don't aggress upon them. Don't aggress upon them.
Hey, excuse me, this is private property.
Later, he tries
Same with that femoid cunt right there. Right there is trying to grab it from him as well.
to convince them that fossil fuels are good.
These fuels are far cheaper, more plentiful, more reliable.
Most protesters don't want to hear it. They know fossil fuels are bad.
Which is hypocritical. Where do you think the plastic, these fucking things for these windmills and the electrical components and all that shit that these windmills and their generators use? Fossil fuels. What do you think the fucking synthetic lubricants, and especially the cases of base oil classes or groups 4 and 5, they may not be just long chains of hydrogen and carbon that are saturated as fuck between 22 to 33, anywhere from 22 carbon atoms long chains to 33 carbon atom long chains. And none of that. They're different structures, and they have crazier way better capabilities than that shit over there. But where does all that carbon and hydrogen for those molecules come from ultimately? Fucking fossil fuels. Still. Not unless you manage to grow a bunch of fucking olive trees to start producing oleic acid to turn into estolides, or if you bring castor bean production back to the States with better equipment and management to prevent as much ricin poisoning as possible from the castor bean plants, and then do that and make estolide lubricants out of that for hydraulics and shit, well then maybe these gearboxes might be a little green, but I don't see it happening. It's still all that components to make these synthetic lubes still largely come from fossil fuels. So this is a giant hypocrisy, and it's an inefficiency. The gearboxes take a lot of fucking lube. More lube than your fattest of X's. Okay.
Fossil fuels help in the short term. That's real. I mean, I turn on the lights every morning.
But
that's
I guess
real. But in the long run, that's not going to help. We're not anti-electricity. We're anti-fossil
You might as well be, Hein. Sorry.
fuels.
Green tyrants tell them to be.
And this is another not fully functioning person.
Made an unrefuted case that it's going to.
If he was made to shut the fuck up more often, he would at best be wage labor goyim, I'm going to say.
Destroy us if we keep doing what we're doing.
This activist is Bill McKibben.
The oceans
Yeah, and he's a fucking fraud.
will rise, that the forests will burn. That
McKibben speaks at camp.
The only reason the forest burns is because, the largest reason that forest burns is because of all the monocropping, industrial agriculture we do, cutting rainforest trees down and jungle trees down, and clearing them to fucking grow more fucking. Oh, what's the main use of soybeans? Oh yeah, I didn't forget. Fucking soybean oil, which most of that goes into the food supply. And then animals get fed the byproduct of soy, and yeah. But vegans will tell you it's not true, even though the actual scientific evidence to show, and the fucking agricultural statistics fucking will point this out very blatantly in your face when you actually look for the shit, the right places. But whatever. I'm just someone who knows about farming. What do I know?
Campus after campus. But this speech was a little different because there was one opposing viewpoint.
Fossil fuels are absolutely essential.
That's Alex Epstein, that counter-protester you saw before.
This guy had said that the fossil fuel industry, which is the industry that makes all of our lives possible, is public enemy number one.
Epstein says it's moral to use fossil fuels. He wanted to debate McKibben, but green tyrants don't like to debate. So if
No, because they're fucking frauds. Tyrants tend to be very fraudulent through and through. One way or another. That's a rule of thumb.
Epstein offered McKibben money.
I'll pay him 10 grand. I'll get him a venue at Duke University. And he said yes.
That's how that rare debate happened. I'm glad students heard points like this.
This is a piece of coal. Basically, all fossil fuel energy is it's taking this rock and figuring out how to use it to charge your iPhone or to power your car.
Now, this right here is a form of coal called anthracite. There's 4 main coal grades. I'll talk about that in a future video one day somewhere down the road. But it's the cleanest and highest grade of coal because it's got the least impurities and all that. The issue with coal as a whole is they don't add calcite and dolomite minerals. These are calcium derived mineral forms to bind to the sulfur for being burned away into sulfur oxides and sulfates that fuck up the atmosphere and contribute to one of the 2 forms of acid rain, right? One of the 2 forms of it. And then gasify this calcite dolomite admix coal before burning that fuel gas off. And by the way, calcite and dolomite admixing to gasification material helps catalyze the cracking of tars and stuff. So that's another bonus. So less tar, longer longevity of gasifiers. Pretty cool, right? And before burning the syngas of gasifying coal off with 95% pure oxygen and exhaust smoke mixed with it, with a small part of the final exhaust smoke sent back to the gasifier to extend how long it can run, preheat the air going into the said gasifier, ideally before mixing with steam, and regulate the temps of the gasifier units. Fuck, you could eventually take this really nasty shit called phenol water and put a phenol water drip into the preheated intake air and eliminate that source of poisoning, raise the fuel economy of these gasifiers even further, and, just make it go for the coal go even further. Fuck, you can make it to where the gasifying zones and then the whole reduction zone and the hearth in that area, those 2 areas, can be taken out and separated from the rest of the gasifier and then replaced without having to rebuild the entirety of the gasifiers by lining the insides of the gasifiers from the top of the hopper down to just above the gasification zones and reduction zones with align it that far up from there that far down with high tip ceramic lining. And you can replace those sections out, put new copies of them in, and start it back up. This is called the coal gasification and then an oxy-fuel combustion process. You can use that to run a fucking water heaters directly, or you can do you can use it to run a gas turbine, and the heat from that can then run a steam turbine. You'll generate even more electricity. So it depends on how you want to approach it. So, or you can dry distill the coal, and you got this really clean fuel called coke, and then you got a mixture of hydrogen, carbon monoxide, ethylene, methane, and a small degree of other hydrocarbon gas, especially if you use calcite to get sulfur. I'm sorry. If you use anthracite and what's called bituminous coal, that's the type that makes tar, most coal tar, and together and do this, you will have a coal gas, and that coal gas can be burned with oxygen too, as long as you stagger the production of certain parts and use coke to continue the heating to generate the heat needed to keep the fucking dry distillation going. You could do a coal plant like that. that could work. That could work. And you make a fuel gas that gets burned off, and then you got a surplus of a fuel that does not need, that can burn clean as fuck on its own. With the oxy-fuel combustion process too. What a shock! And if you're so worried about CO2, get the biomethane infrastructure going so we can use that natural gas to reform the CO2 with plasma arcs. And we can use synthetic, so we can take that to make synthetic heavy naphtha, synthetic kerosene, and synthetic diesel to mix as a cold weather handling diesel to extend our diesel supply, and then lastly make synthetic natural gas, or to stagger it to the majority of the methane and natural gas to fuel airplanes. And make consistent LNG to make to fuel fucking that fucking natural gas airplanes. I'm doing a video on that pretty soon. Speaking of the plasma arcs, see that? Oh, this is a screenshot of an experiment done on Magnetic Energy Secrets by Paul Mario Babcock. Any fucking body could replicate this. It's a simple circuit to use to compare the energy expression effect of two electrical bodies of equal resistance, one body being a coil and the other being a resistor. And speaking of that whole plasma arc for plasma CO2 dry reforming, here's this one. This was a 4 Henry 40 ohm solenoid coil, and it was gas. It had a little air in it, but the pellets were, as a core constructed of pelletized carbon-free steel, and the pellets were coated with acrylic. And what happened then? He took input power, and used 40 ohm resistor, made a nice little arc. Then what he did was he swapped the resistor out with a coil of the same resistance, so using the same 360 watts, and look how much more intense the plasma arc got. That's got me thinking about some things we could try. Speaking of the plasma arc, and you can make a variety of synthetic fuel products and stuff like that doing that. You can fucking even make potentially certain forms of synthetic lubricant with CO2 reforming that way. But what do I know? I don't know nothing, right? If you want to see more of this kind of stuff, I'll link you the Magnetic Energy Secrets episode, presentation number 1. Please check it out.
I think that's amazing.
It is amazing.
It's amazing, but look what I just went through just to explain all the ways we could do better. Different paths we could take.
But it pollutes.
Energy is a climate protection device, and we need
Sure, this is true.
as much of it as we can get.
There we go.
Yeah, that's true too.
This is what we do on live television, folks, in the blizzard.
Nature doesn't give us a safe climate that we're making dangerous. It gives us an incredibly dangerous climate that we're making safe.
Certainly safer. Even as the globe has warmed, climate-related deaths have dropped by a lot. Since 1933, by
Yeah, that's true.
98%.
We desperately need the rain.
Drought used to be the biggest climate-related killer, but those deaths are way down.
Oh, yeah.
Because fossil fuels allowed trucks to bring food to people who once starved, and because farmers fight drought with fossil fuel-powered irrigation pumps.
Some are doing domestic biofuel systems to extend the fuel supply when they get shortages as well, and they're able to work almost or just as good, and they know how to produce the fuel to stagger it out for longer run times and ways to increase how far the fuel can be used by improving fuel economy through varying tricks. And if you improve fuel economy, your emissions go down even further by proxy. You're not putting as much out to do the same work. That mathematically is pretty self-evident there.
Still, global warming may become a big problem.
All the worst predictions, if they never materialize, what will be the harm that is done from having made the decision to respond to it?
What's the harm?
Kerry was giving that speech in Indonesia. If they hadn't been able to use coal, which is what Kerry thinks they shouldn't be able to use, they would still be desperately poor.
We're talking Great Depression. Back in when you grew up in the South picking cotton in the cotton fields like my dad was, it didn't matter what skin color you were. It didn't matter if you was half native like my dad was, if you was Hispanic mestizo, if you was black, if you was Asian, or if you were poor and you grew up picking cotton with your bare hands. You grew up picking cotton. And you were just as likely to get cracked across the back and called the N-word and pick that cotton, you bleep. Psh. The stories my dad used to tell me. Holy shit. My dad was born in 1938. He lived through some of that. He grew up doing that shit. Yeah. Yeah. Anyway. We're talking that kind of desolate and poor. That's what probably, or something to give you something to, as a frame of reference to kind of try to conceptualize how fucked they'd be.
But the protesters don't think about that. And the green tyrants have convinced them other fuels are just as good.
Renewables really work.
100% renewable for Americans means Americans get to control and own their own energy.
Which is a good thing if you actually advocated for nuclear and decentralized biofuel and synthetic fuel co-production using some of that nuclear grid-based electrical input. If you want to understand how to bring back better electricity, you also want to look at the electrical utility in the digital age and revival of the science of electricity in the digital age by Eric Dollard. It's a beautiful little booklet. That's Charles Proteus Steinmetz. So looks like a guy who come out of looks like a dwarf out of Lord of the Rings without the pointed ears and the long braided hair and beard. That's Oliver Heaviside. That is J.J. Thomson, and that is James Clerk Maxwell. See? Steinmetz, Heaviside, Maxwell, and Thomson. And yeah. Brilliant guys. They're not looked at enough. Anyway, let's get back to the video.
Politicians give your money to people who sell wind power and solar power.
We've got to keep developing new sources of energy.
Europe tried that first, but then noticed the wind doesn't always blow.
No shit.
And clouds sometimes block the sun.
May I also suggest check out the Secret of Tesla's Power Magnification presentation, co-starring Jim Murray and Paul Babcock as well.
Electricity prices shot way up. So now in Europe,
many governments are reinvesting in fossil fuels.
They're actually building more coal capacity than ever to
no shit.
Compensate for the renewables that they can't rely upon. Sometimes there's too much. Sometimes there's too little. You want forms of energy that you can control, not that control you.
But activists point out renewables are improving. Today, they provide 13% of America's electricity.
Yeah, they kind of had a dip when that fucking big snowstorm happened in Texas, and they still are coping and seething about us that pointed out. And go, no, just like when harder Whitney Houston fans when I was a kid were still going, no, when everybody said, that bitch smoked her kneecaps off. She's so cracked out. You kidding me?
However,
when people say renewable, they usually think solar and wind, but those contribute a very minuscule percentage.
Yeah, and they're fucking horrid.
It's mostly hydro, which is a great source of energy.
It is. I wish the silt was rerouted, new rivers and streams and dams, and streams will get rerouted through different places, and then eventually to the actual rivers that go eventually to the ocean, to give minerals and stuff to the ocean and help with some of those dead zones for, where algae have largely died and stuff. That would be nice.
That the environmentalists mostly oppose.
It kills fish.
Yeah, and the Sierra Club's list of its most proud accomplishments, it lists all the dams it shuts down.
Don't the activists see the contradiction? No.
In the future, cars could be powered by hazelnuts. That's encouraging, considering an 8-ounce jar of hazelnuts costs about $9.
He made one of the best arguments ever against solar, wind, and biofuels. I just don't think he realizes it.
He made an argument against biofuel hype, technically, but yeah.
After all, Fallon belongs to a group that attacks fossil fuel.
True. Anyways, guys, I hope you enjoyed that. I will see you guys later on. Thanks for watching.